In 1981, Dr. Jose Rizal was no longer interested in combating through writing. It was useless trying to change the mindset of the reactionary peninsulars. Rizal realized that there was no need to convince the peninsulars that the Filipinos constituted a nation, and what only needed to be done is to assert the fact. It was a time for the Ilustrados to come home and unite with the people to fight for the nation, the Philippines. This involved a twofold task of sowing an idea and mobilizing the people to struggle, in the spirit of sacrifice and martyrdom for their emancipation. How was this arduous mission achieved? What enabled the people to unite? What inspired them to work together? In Gramscian terms, how was an historic bloc formed? By whose moral and intellectual leadership? In short, how did a counter-hegemonic movement get underway? This Gramscian questions has a fruitful approach suggested by Homi Bhabha's notion of nation as a narrative. The nation exists conceptually with the narrative structures, or is imagined by historical agents in terms of contending narratives. Narrative was defined as a sequence of events that have been ordered into a story, while event was defined as a transition from one state to another and involves the elements of time and place. We can better discern the process of national formation in the latter part of the 19th century by explicating how the major ideological currents, the Enlightenment narratives of the Ilustrados and the Passion narrative of the popular masses, became articulated into a grand narrative of emancipation. Homi Bhabha wrote in his Nation and Narration, "The narrative of the modern nation can only begin," Benedict Anderson suggests, "in imagined communities once the notion of the arbitrariness of design features the sacral ontology of the medieval world and its overwhelming visual and oral imaginary." In the case of the 19th century Philippine nationalist movement, Anderson's insight need to be modified. The featuring of the sacral ontology of the Passion epic mobilized alternative meanings that constituted the counter-hegemonic grand narrative of the Philippine Revolution. The grand narrative was built from the teachings and organizational efforts of Rizal and Bonifacio. They were brothers in the Masonry, and both steeped in the Enlightenment and the Passion traditions. The new nation emerged from this grand narrative and historic bloc that began from 1892 to 1898. To understand how this came about, we must understand how the Enlightenment and Passion came to be woven into a single story. This occurred when one strand from the Ilustrado narrative became articulated with the Fox Passion. The first documented Passion-inspired Germano-Polesco Fraja de San Jose dates back to the 1830s. Let us start with the Passion, the origin of Passion, and the role in the 19th century nationalist movement. According to Sue Salazar, the implicit historical sentiment behind every myth, legend, or ritual in the ancient Filipino worldview was cyclical, and this sense of eternal recurrence is born out of life's rhythms. This sense of time would be disrupted by Spanish colonial conquest that imposed a bipartite narrative based on two dimensions, before and after the coming of the Spaniards, that is from darkness to light, savagery to civilization, sin to salvation. Colonial narrative is the theme that the Spaniards came to save the natives from themselves. To the now colonized natives, they now have kasaysayan, meaning and relevance, in relation to the entire archipelago as a field of Hispanic colonial endeavor, and to Spain as this national or Christian monarchic idea was understood by the religious and by more secular minds. The narrative of redemption is appropriated by the native folk against the Spanish colonizers and used against them. It evolved into a spontaneous subaltern collective writing and telling and retelling of the Passion epic. The Passion epic became the master narrative in the subsequent construction of other contending secular narratives of emancipation that flowed from the pens and lips of the mostly European-educated native bourgeoisie. Counter-hegemonic narrative developed to become a potent narrative of resistance in the revolution against Spain. The Holy Week ritual of the Passion, the pilgrimage to sacred sites like Mount Maneja and Rizal's novels, we can see clearer the hegemonic process at work. Class alignments, historical block that formed the celebrated essay of Constantino Provoked. First was the propaganda movement a reformist, counter-revolutionary movement. Second, did Rizal and Bonifacio espouse diametrically opposed political programs? And third, was Rizal a counter-revolutionary? The structure of the Passion epic. The basic theme of the story is the Lost Eden. The basic tripartite plot is paradise to paradise lost to paradise regained. The native structure of the Passion is the basic eschatological structure of the Judeo-Christian. It reflected in some of the writings of Irish nationalists. The Mexican Revolution also showed features of the Passion, such as the Via Crucis and cult of the Virgin Guadalupe. The native appropriation of this Judeo-Christian theme provided the popular masses with a coherent framework for interpreting and changing their world. Ileto follows Constantino's dichotomy in putting the Ilustrados and the masses in an antagonistic relationship. Thus, Ileto sees the Enlightenment and Passion as two separate currents. The Judeo-Christian theme of redemption provided the link between the nationalist Ilustrados and the revolutionary masses. In the narrative, redemption was the overriding theme because the nation was viewed as embodying a sacred covenant between moral individuals. The means with which to fight for the nation, a sacred end, have to be moral and sacred as well, a sentiment shared by a millennial folk. Rizal said, "On the day when all Filipinos should think like Del Pilar and like us, on that day we shall have fulfilled our arduous mission, which is the formation of the Filipino nation." Rizal was able to articulate the separate traditions of the Enlightenment and the Passion through his writings. Rizal's national view of history comes closest to the framework of the Passion.
Narratives of emancipation. Compare the Passion with the Ilustrado-led so-called propaganda movement. The basic structure of the plot was derived from the European Enlightenment. Narrative and emancipation is not cyclical but linear. Pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial. This is the narrative progress that responds of the nationalist to enlightenment, freedom, and rationality. In propaganda movement, there were three contending narrative variants, one of which, Rizal's, would be incorporated into the Passion epic. These three narrative variants will shed light on the questions we have raised in Chapter 1, who was reformist and who was radical. It will also challenge the orthodox historical view that three recognized leaders of propaganda, Luciano Lopez Haina, Marcelo H. del Pilar, Jose Rizal. They all share the same ideological platforms. A grand narrative of redemption and tragedy. Pre-colonial. For Lopez Haina, Filipinos had inferior civilization, blood compact made in order for Mother Spain civilized and Christianized daughter Filipinas. While for Del Pilar, ambivalent view, one moment, Filipinos thought to be in primitive state, then as having a civilization, a degree of enlightenment. But for Rizal, Filipinos had a civilization of her own, and was progressing, armed with their own capacities and virtues. Colonial. For Lopez Haina, encomenderos first charged with civilizing nation, then friars who established phylocracia and hampered progress, which was inevitable. For Del Pilar, Filipino capacity for progress impeded by monastic supremacy, progress due to Filipinos alone and external forces. But for Rizal, decay and retrogression under Spanish rule, civic virtues lost, vices have taken over, social cancer in late 19th century. Next is post-colonial. Lopez Haina said that friars must go. Revolution has advantage of being surgical, but liberal reform better. Integration of autonomous Filipinos with Spain. In Del Pilar, elimination of friar rule, at first assimilationist. Haina favored revolution, freedom won with blood of Filipinos. But for Rizal, release of creative forces of the race with attainment of freedom, probably through revolution, tactically through reform. Rizal's conception of tripartite historical ideology of the propaganda was most extreme. In contrast to Haina and Del Pilar, Rizal saw the problem more holistically. From the perspective of Filipino people, not from the actual possession of political power by any social group, foreign or local. The entire regime was the root of social concern, not just phylocracy or monastic supremacy. The very existence of Spanish domination was the cause of the disease that afflicted Filipinos, not because of the innate capacity of the Filipino for progress. Rizal's national view of history appealed to Bonifacio because it articulated well with Bonifacio's revolutionary sentiments. Now, let's go to folk traditions of the Tagalog region. Rizal was familiar with this, which spearheaded the revolution. Like the Letosites, for example, the reference to the Tagalog legend Bernardo Carpio in the Efili. Also, in his childhood, Rizal imbibed the folklore of Calamba through the storytelling of his relatives, most especially his mother. Rizal's familiarity with popular traditions, with peasants' culture and village life is abundantly reflected in his novels. Rizal's sympathies are not in the loyal, landed elite like the corrupt and opportunistic Captain Tiago, or with the egoistic Ibarra, or the morbid sentimentalist Maria Clara. But his sympathies are with the simple village folk, Sisa and her children, Crispin and Basilio, the farmer Cabezal Talas and his family, Alias, and the erudite philosopher Tasha.
Rizal in the idiom of the Passion. We may also assume that Bonifacio read Rizal's novels from the perspective of the Passion, and thus disseminated it in a form that would resonate with the popular reading of the Passion. This was done in two ways. First, through the issue of the Kalayaan, or the Katipunan's organ, which contained Bonifacio's tract summarizing Rizal's national view of Philippine history entitled Ang Dapat Mabatid ng Mga Tagalog. And second, through the Katipunan initiation rites, where the initiate had to pass the first test by answering correctly the three questions derived from the tripartite narrative. The three questions are, first, about the condition of the Philippines before the coming of the Spaniards, Second, its condition since then. And third, its condition after liberation from colonial rule. The initiate was expected to have read by then the Suprema's Tract. In the last stage, the initiate enters the Katipunan sacred domain through the ritual of pilgrimage. The Kalayaan is circulated in central and southern Luzon. Only 1,000 copies were printed. Each copy was avidly read and passed from hand to hand. The circulation of this is a crucial factor in the phenomenal growth of the Katipunan. From a membership of 300 in January 1896 to 30,000 by August of the same year. The most important item in the Kalayaan issue is Bonifacius' tract, ang dapat mabatid ng mga Tagalog. The second important piece in the Kalayaan is the nationalist narrative in the form of an encounter between a youth called Katagalugan and the Spirit of a Kalayaan by Emilio Jacinto. Ang dapat mabatid ng mga Tagalog. Bonifacius' text begins with the pre-colonial period and then recounts the fall that ensued with the arrival of the Spaniards. Pre-colonial. Ileto notes the image of paradise that this passage evokes. In particular, the terms kasaganaan and kaginhawaan, an image that appealed to the popular imagination. Bonifacius' description is a romanticized version of Rizal's work on the Morga. Rizal certainly did not conjure up a picture of paradise. Pre-colonial society was flourishing, but it was not perfect. Arrival of the Spaniards and the Vlad Compact. This historic Pacto de Sangre is the 19th century Filipino nationalist version of the social contract and theory of political obligation. This is taking blood from each other's veins, mixing and drinking it as a sign of genuine and wholeheartedly sincerity in pledging not to be traitorous to their agreement. The theory that runs from the propaganda movement is that the Filipinos entered freely into a formal alliance with Spain on condition of reciprocity and mutual obligation, such that a violation by one party justifies the dissolution of the contract, thereby freeing the other party from his own obligation. King Sikatuna and Legazpi entered the Blood Compact. Rizal was aware of the fact that Sikatuna was a local chief, not the king of Philippine Islands, who entered into alliance with Legazpi in behalf of his chiefdom. Hence, their Pacto de Sangre is not a formal treaty between two sovereign nation-states. There are different interpretations of Pacto de Sangre between Bonifacio and Agoncillo, Del Pilar, and Mabini. The Pacto de Sangre was beside the point. With or without it, it is a fact that Spain's imposition of her sovereignty decimated and demoralized the Filipino people and caused their retrogression. Rizal wanted to emphasize that Spanish colonizers had a tendency to enter into and get out of contracts with people whenever it suited their interest. Rizal minces no words about the arrival of the Spaniards. It was an invasion, plain and simple. In a footnote to Morga, Rizal explains how the Spaniards succeeded in imposing their rule for the reason that people were simply not united. For the people, it was simply a change of masters. And for the noble, they had to accept tyranny when they found it was stronger than theirs. The impact of the colonial rule. For 300 years, we have been giving the most prosperous life to the Spaniards, even if we ourselves were deprived and hungry. We defended them against our own countrymen who refused their rule. We see nothing but treachery as a reward for our favors. And every sigh we utter is branded by them a great sin and punished with inhuman cruelty. All this is vintage Rizal, echoing the words of Elias, Simon, and Cabezang Tales. Note that there is mixing of metaphors and idioms. First, the blood compact, as we have mentioned, is from Del Pilar. Second, the invoking of reason is vintage enlightenment. And third, the word landas, liwanag, loob, ginhawa are all images of the Passion. Bonifacio's manifesto thus reflects the syncretism of the grand narrative of the nation. The form is of the Passion and the historical content from Rizal's work on the Morga. The second important piece in the Kalayaan is by Emilio Jacinto, a 19-year-old law student who was considered as the brains of the Katipunan. It conveys the nationalist narrative in the form of an encounter between a youth called Katagalugan and the spirit of Kalayaan. The scene unfolds in an interplay of darkness and light. One horrible dark night, when not a star was shining, as a disconsolate Katagalugan sits by a flickering oil lamp, weeping over his miserable state, Kalayaan appears in the shadows as a halo of white vapor, and addresses Katagalugan in a sad and sweet-sounding voice, asking him why he weeps. When Katagalugan fails to recognize Kalayaan and replies that his sorrow knows no consolation, Kalayaan chastises him. Kalayaan said that she was not surprised that she was not recognized by Katagalugan, since it was already 300 years since she last visited his land. Kalayaan then introduced herself and explained her role in humanity. When Kalayaan admonishes Katagalugan not to weep, Katagalugan protests that from the time we were in our mother's womb, we have learned to suffer and endure all kinds of affliction, contempt, and rebuff. What more can you ask us to do but weep? To make Katagalugan understand his present condition and enable him to see the future with hope, Kalayaan explains Katagalugan's past and present in terms of the Passion narrative and counsels what ought to be done, that is, from the standpoint of redemption. Kalayaan explained how the Tagalog or native people live in the shade of her protection, and when slavery arrived in this country disguised as virtue and justice, the Tagalogs believed her and Kalayaan was forgotten. But Kalayaan heard their sighs, which was why she came. But now she must live. When Katagalugan begs Kalayaan to stay, she firmly replies, "But no man is worthy of my protection and care who is not fond of me, does not love me, and is not able to die for me. You can announce this to your compatriots." At that point, the flickering flame of the oil lamp dies. Jacinto's piece is more vivid and gripping than Bonifacio's straightforward narrative, echoing sentiments that Rizal had expressed in his writings. From the Junto al Pasig of his Ateneo days to his novels, in particular in the characters of Elias and Father Florentino. In Kalayaan's last line, which is almost a word-for-word restatement of Rizal's thoughts on liberty in his April 2, 1889 letter to the members of La Solidaridad, liberty is a woman who grants her favors only to the brave. Enslaved peoples have to suffer much to win her, and those who abuse her lose her. Liberty is not obtained bubilis bubilis, without pain or merit, nor is it granted gratis et amore. Even the way Kalayaan spoke to Katagalugan is a reminiscent of the encounter between the youthful Leonido and Satan in Rizal's 1879 drama in verse Junto al Pasig, recalls Satan's admonition to the impious Leonido. These are the messages of kalayaan to the youthful Katagalugan. First, the theme of Lost Eden. Filipinos, under the spell of slavery's mask of beauty, goodness, and slickness, have forgotten that in a previous happy age, through kalayaan's protective care, they had lived in peace, prosperity, and knowledge. Second, the recovery of this lost state of abundance and happiness through virtue and sacrifice and an abiding faith in kalayaan constitutes redemption, the third and last phase of the nationalist narrative. And third, the moral theme of redemption. It ties Rizal to Bonifacio and thus to the popular masses. It is thus the key to understanding why Rizal's writings, as mediated by Bonifacio, as well as his stunning martyrdom, struck a chord in the popular imagination. In this sense, the theme of redemption is at the heart of the national popular will, and as such is the key to understanding the development of national consciousness and the formation of a historic bloc against Spanish and American imperialism.
Rizal and the popular imagination. There are several elements involving inversions and subversion of mainstream cultural codes in the Pasion, the lakaran or pilgrimage from a fallen state to redemption, the need for penitencia, for sacrifice, atonement, and cleansing of the spirit. The Mayan, an intense, joyful communita state of solidarity. This became the narrative elements that animated the village folks' resistance to Spanish colonial rule. The popular imagery of redemption can be gleaned from the rituals of pilgrimage, which enact the individuals or groups' passage from one state of being to another, from a condition of human frailty to a condition of moral transcendence and therefore of spiritual power. Pilgrimage in the popular consciousness is the arduous journey that one must undertake in order to enter a sacred domain. In the Philippine folk Catholicism, this is epitomized in the Via Cruz paradigm, which is reenacted through the penitencia, the carrying of the cross, and the flagellation during Holy Week. The pilgrimage to a sacred mountain dates back to the 19th century. After its brutal suppression in 1840, its remnants, which came to be known as the Floro, continued their rituals of pilgrimage in the mountain. Such ritual reenacted the process of entering the paradise by passing through the Holy Gate, a small cave opening called the Pinto, and the crawling with much physical effort through a narrow subterranean tunnel to emerge at the other end and into the light. In Mount Maneja, this ritual is still enacted to this day. The narrow passage where this takes place is called Ihusgahan. A variation of the colorum ritual is found in the last stage of the Katipunan initiation rite, which appropriates both the images of the Holy Gate and of Mount Calvary. At the beginning of the ritual, the Mabalasik or Terrible Inquisitor interrogates the neophytes. It is cited in Ileto 1979-117. Who are you and what are you searching for here? Have you learned that you will find here what you are searching for? And who told you this? And who revealed this to you so that you came to have this purpose? Do you not know that once you have joined this Katipunan, you will be at the threshold of the most frightful dangers, such as being thrown into various faraway places, or being separated from your most beloved parents, spouses, children, and relatives? Are you not afraid? Do you not fear being imprisoned in a lonely cell, or ascending the scaffold to meet the ignominious death? Do you dread rushing to the attack in the face of certain death? After the neophytes give the correct answers, they are then taken to the next chamber called Karurukan, where the brother Taliba or sentinel asks, "Where have you come from?" To which the neophyte spokesperson answers, "We have come from the mire of slavery, say from the claws of blindness. We have repeatedly passed through various obstacles and dangers and now are calling before your holy gate in search of for kalayaan." When neophytes have passed through the holy gate, it means that they have crossed the threshold and thus have entered the secret domain of the Katipunan Brotherhood. This moment symbolizes them being reborn as new men who can give up their lives for kalayaan. In 1895, Before the outbreak of the revolution, Bonifacio and 8 leading members of the Katipunan performed a most dramatic pilgrimage. This was a historic gesture that's linked to the millenarian tradition of the Tagalogs, in particular the Passion. It is unmistakable for 2 reasons. First, Bonifacio's group chose Mount Tapusi as the site of the pilgrimage. Second, they chose the Holy Week of April from Holy Tuesday to Holy Saturday to make the pilgrimage. Led by an old man named Tandang Pelis, they entered the caves of Mount Tapusi on Good Friday. They regarded the cave as the cave of Bernardo Carpio. Bonifacio, with a piece of charcoal, wrote on the walls, "Long live Philippine independence." Guillermo Masancay, a surviving member of the group who was interviewed by Chodoro Agoncillo in 1949, recalled that each one signed his name on the wall with a trembling hand and in tears in his eyes. Bonifacio's choice of Mount Tapusi was significant. Tagalog peasants believed that their legendary folk hero Bernardo Carpio was imprisoned in the caves of the mountain and was awaiting the day to be brought about by the completion of a redemptive event, when he would break loose and return to free his people. Thus, by making the pilgrimage to Mount Tapusi during the Holy Week, Bonifacio was drawing upon 2 folk traditions, the legend of Bernardo Carpio and the Passion, to dramatize the twofold goal of the national liberation, freedom from oppression, and as redemption, the recovery of lost Eden. Several features of the Passion constituting the theme of redemption are inscribed in the revolutionary literature of the period, from the folk awit and vernacular poetry written by the Katipuneros to Rizal's novels. There are the notion of separation, of the severance of existing ties to the past or to loved ones such as parents or spouses, the transition or passage from one state of being or place in time, and entry into another realm, a spiritual domain. The notion of rebirth, of resurrection symbolized as dawn, the emergence of light and sun rising from the east. The significance of the twin metaphors of bundok and gubat in the revolutionary literature has not been fully explored in Procopius' poem. The connection between gubat and lakaran points to the dual meaning involved in the notion of a passage, the linked meanings of departure and arrival, a going out and an entry into, a movement from one state of being, place, or time into another. In the Christian narrative, this passage is Christ's journey to the forest, where he is completely engulfed in liwanag. Land I idolize, prime sorrow among my sorrows, beloved Philippines, hear me the farewell word. I bequeath you my everything, my family, my affections. I go where no slaves are, no butchers, no oppressors, where faith cannot kill, where God's the sovereign Lord. If the forest mountains stand for sacred space, paradise, light, redemption, freedom, and independence, why do the towns signify slavery, darkness, and fall? What is exactly the contrast between the towns and the forest? It is a space where the rule of law and the authority of the state prevail. In other words, a town is a space inside the domain of state and violence. The trope of a journey from a town to the forest signifies a pilgrimage into sacred place, figuratively represented as passing through the gates of heaven, or crossing the threshold that limits what is inside the state's domain and from what is outside, a realm not covered by logic of state and its monopoly violence. Hence, in the counter-discourse of the popular imagination, the rebel is regarded as taong tagalabas. However, the rebel is also a prophet, a healer, and therefore, magaling that is someone imbued with kapangyarihan. Precisely because he is outside the law, the taong tagalabas is in touch with sacred, the real repository of power. This is the reason why who rebels is said to be the namumundok. Indeed, one actualizes the potency of his anting-anting or amulet by taking it to the bundok, and while there, he can avail himself of an anting-anting. The space outside of the state, the forest and mountain, is the domain of freedom, and therefore, in the popular consciousness, it signifies the negation of all that the Spanish colonial regime stands for, as well as the affirmation of all the oppressive regime denies or withholds from the people. A moral economy of abundance and of fraternity. However, the term of enlightenment fraternity, in connotating a solidarity of men, excludes women. In the folk discourse of the Tagalogs, No such exclusion exists as the concept of kanpatiran or katipunan is not gender marked. Indeed, in the folk discourse, women are regarded not only as the equal of men, but also as more than able to men to gain access to the spiritual power, a reversal of the patriarchal orientation of the Spanish theocracy. The priest is called katalonan or babaylan. In pre-colonial times, were usually women. The gubat or bundok, being the repository of spiritual power, is represented in folk discourse as female, the forest as womb, and the mountain as kina. In contrast to the state that is represented as male, authority, violence. Thus, gubat or bundok stands for nurturance, abundance, freedom, sanctuary, a safe haven for tulisanes, outcasts, and rebels. It is also the abode of prophets, healers, duendes, nymphs, and goddess. The legend of Mariang Makiling, famous among the Tagalogs, especially in the town surrounding Mangmakiling in Laguna Province, epitomizes the multiple meanings associated with the gubat or bundok symbol. In 1890, Rizal recorded this legend of a fantastic creature, half nymph and half sylph, who lived in the mountain between Laguna and Tayabas and is now called Quezon Province. A kind and charitable virgin, Maria Makiling fell in love with a handsome and industrious man who owned a farm on the slopes of the mountain. She blessed his farm, protecting it from typhoons, droughts, and pestilence. Although tender and benevolent, the maiden of extraordinary beauty could transform herself into the frightening creature who scared away hunters and animals. The time came for all the bachelors to enlist in military service. Rather than having spent years in the barracks, the young man's parents arranged to have him marry a woman in a village. He thought he had no choice but to obey his parents. On the eve of the wedding, Mariang Makiling appeared before him and gave him a dress and jewels for his betrothed. She spoke these parting words, "I have protected you and loved you because I saw you were good and industrious, and I wish you had been devoted to me. Go, inasmuch as earthly love is necessary to you, inasmuch as you have no confidence in me, I who have protected you and your parents, go. I deliver you to your fate. Live and struggle alone. Live as you can." After that, Mariang Makiling was never seen again. What do we make out of this allegorical legend? All the folk symbols are here: forest, mountain, a beautiful goddess who nurtures nature's bounty, succoring the needy and the weak, rewarding the industrious with abundant harvests. Mariang Makiling, the spirit of the mountain, is also the goddess of liberty, who withdraws her blessings from the young man because he lacks courage to face the hard lot to defend liberty and make himself independent in the bosom of these mountains, and who, moreover, does not have the confidence in her, who would have protected him and his parents. Cast out of the mountain and back within the town, the young man is delivered in faith, to live as best as he can and to struggle alone. And because the young man has proved unworthy of her, Mariang Makiling herself disappears. Hence, there was no more spirit to nourish the land and guarantee the town folks' well-being.
Forest in the novel Noli Me Tangere is described as a peninsula forest in the self-cultivated fields. Rizal took the job of gubat as a dark mysterious space of death, particularly when the forest is not within a mountainous place but is by a town. This was used in the following. Alias's grandfather. After getting accused and punished severely as an arsonist, he was eventually freed. When he recovered, he hid in the mountains with his wife and child. Miserable, alone, hated, and shunned by all. The husband hung himself and his death was blamed onto his wife. The wife was then flogged in public after giving birth. This child would then be Elisa's father. Balat and his mother. Balat grew up to become a dreaded Tulisan who evoked terror in all the neighboring provinces because in his revenge, he did everything with blood and fire. His head was hung in a tree near where his brother and mother lived. This horrible sight caused the death of the mother, and the younger son was left alone. The younger boy, Elisa's father, fled like one accursed from town to town by mountains and valley, until he found a job as a laborer. He then got married into young heiress. Here, his troubles began. His past was revealed. The woman's rich father got him persecuted and imprisoned. The grief-stricken young woman died after giving birth to twins. Elias and his sister was made to believe that their father was dead by their maternal grandfather. It was not long enough until the twins suffered because of the sordid family battle. At the time Ibar makes friends with Elias, the latter sister died a mysterious and bloody death, and Elias has become a wanderer again. He is now an outlaw, a solitary rebel whose permanent abode is the forest outside of civil society and the laws and judgments of men. However, he does not completely detach himself from civil society. Note that Elias singles out the basic instruments of the colonial state as being the major impediments to justice, a point that Ibarra did not immediately apprehend. In the colonial state, the police, the priests, the government officials, and the rich peninsulars use the law, not to ensure justice for all, but to oppress and exploit the weak. In the mind of Elias or Rizal, the society was culturally and morally alien to the people, needed to be transformed into an ethical community. Only then can human law be made to conform to moral law and be enforced to protect the weak by uniting with the people and spreading the idea of what it means to be a nation. Thus, there are two approaches to the colonial situation in Dali. First of all, the schoolhouse project is merely palliative and would not prevent injustice and oppression. Second, any measure, even a palliative, would surely be blocked by the powers that be. Third, anyone who initiates improvement would certainly be silenced and destroyed.
The mountain as sanctuary. The trope of the mountain as sanctuary are developed in the saga of Cabezang Tales's family, a narrative that runs from the last chapter of the Noli to the end of the Fili. This single narrative thread has not been studied because critics have always analyzed the Noli and the Fili as two separate novels. Actually, they are two parts of one novel. The last chapter of the Noli takes place on Christmas evening, the climax of the merriest season in the Philippines. The Christmas season is as important as the Holy Week in shaping folk perception of events. In fact, it is not the Passion of Christ as such, but the Christ story that structures the folk perception of time. Last chapter opens with a happy family living high up on the slopes of the mountain, conjuring an image of a carefree and abundant existence in which children can play without fear, a sanctuary where the family has nursed the fugitive Basilio back to health. However, it is Christmas Eve. Basilio is sad thinking about his mother Sisa and brother Crispin, whom he has not seen for more than a month. Tandang Celo asks Basilio what he wants for Christmas, and he replies that his only wish is to see his family. The old man and his family dissuade Basilio from going back to town. In the town, Basilio finally catches sight of his mother, but as he chases Sisa, a stone thrown by a bystander strikes her head, causing it to bleed. Sisa seeks help in the town's nearby forest, but eventually dies before it came to Basilio's senses. Moments later, Elias appears wounded, requesting to Basilio to cremate his body together with Sisa's and dig near the balete tree where he has hidden Ibarra's treasure that could be used in Basilio's education. Before sinking to the ground, Elias murmurs, "I die without seeing the dawn brighten over my native land. You who have to see it, welcome it and forget not those who have fallen during the night." Elias finally breaks the chain of evil that began when his grandfather was falsely accused by Don Pedro. Elias dies in the same tree where Don Pedro hanged himself 4 generations before. Sisa and Basilio are reunited near the same tree. Elias and Sisa died redeemed, Sisa having regained her sanity and motherly love at the sight of Basilio. The trope of the forest or mountain is an essential element in the narrative of Noli and Fili and is in fact crucial in determining the thematic significance of Elias, Sisa, Basilio, and Cabezang Tales.
The saga begins when Tandang Celo, together with his wife and children, moved to the border of the town, where the whole family labors to transform a thickly wooded virgin area into productive farmland. The land rewards their labors with a rich harvest, and Tales plans to build a permanent wooden house in the barrio of Sapang. a religious corporation, claiming that Tales fields fall within its boundaries, demands an annual rent of 30 pesos. Not knowing Spanish and having no money to pay a lawyer, Tales yields to the corporation, convinced that if he fights the friars, he will be like an earthen pot smashing against the iron pot. His father, Tandang Celo, wishing to console him, advises Tales to pretend that the 30 pesos had fallen into the water and been swallowed by a caiman. Nevertheless, the merciless corporation continues to harass Tales with endless demands for a higher rent. He finally refuses to pay but becomes embroiled in a disastrous litigation that destroys his family and finances. The saga ends with a violent encounter between Tano, who has become a Guardia Civil, and Tales and his father, both of which Tano fails to recognize. Tandang Celo is shot dead unwittingly by his grandson. Like Elias and Sisa, Tandang Celo has returned to the mountain to die. It is highly symbolic that the tragedy was set in motion when Tales and his once happy family came down from the mountain to try their luck in civil society. Rizal's political perspective is informed by two distinct traditions, the Enlightenment and the Passion. A careful study of the narrative structures of the Filinoli shows that they subvert both the straightforward, linear, nationalist narrative of the Ilustrados and the nonlinear and folk narrative of the Passion. The Noli-Fili plots indicate that Rizal could not totally embrace the third part, redemption in the Passion narrative, or independence in the Ilustrado narrative in his novels. The two protagonists, Ibar and Elias, fell miserably despite their best effort, each meeting a tragic death. Rizal's contemporaries expected a more positive ending for the Noli sequel, the Fili, however, and even more tragically. Though Simon has revealed all his dark secrets to the priest, it is not clear whether Simon dies in a state of redemption like Elias. Both novels ended without showing the solution to the conscious predicament. Graciano Lopez Sena, one of the Rizal's friends, showed his disappointment in Rizal's book to his October 2, 1891 letter to Rizal that he would have liked to see Simon succumb magnanimously like a true hero. He would have liked the novel's last chapter to encourage the people's mettle. He understood, however, that Rizal wished to leave to the Filipino people the solution of their social and political problems. A question concerning the ending of Rizal's Fili, raised by Lopez Sena, strikes the heart of the dilemma of the Philippine nationalism. His observation was that the Fili's beginning was bright and hopeful, while the end was dark and confused. Two opposing forces constitute the inner tension of Rizal's novels. The beginning is a call to arms, and the ending is a warning about how the response to that call can go wrong. The Fili is not merely a warning. It is also an appeal to the next generation, a call to the youth to take over and carry the tradition what their elders have failed to accomplish. If the Noli epitomized the biblical prophecy that the sins of the fathers are visited on the sons, the Fili addressed the unsolid youth to redeem their elders.